Hey guys, I asked you all for questions last week, I think, on Facebook, and I actually printed them all out, and I'm in the pool now, and I'm going to answer them for you. The first question is from Kevin. Kevin says, what are your thoughts on watermarks, especially with this recent article building buzz? Do you use them or not? And he put a couple of links to articles on dpreview.com just about copyright theft and just about, watermarks. I don't worry overly much about watermarks. I use them on a case-by-case basis, but rarely. I've seen a couple of folks use my images on their blogs, except their blogs were about my site, so it's pretty easy to let it slide. For something like senior portrait proofs, yeah, I'd watermark them. Out on my Zenfolio site, where I make big prints for you, no watermarks. Next question is from Mike. Mike says, okay, do you own just a small point and shoot camera? I have a D300 and D300S with 70 to 200 millimeters f2.8 and 35 and 50 millimeters f1.8. I really at times just want a small pocket camera to throw in my motorcycle bag or occasionally give to an assistant when shooting events. Have considered the Sony RX100II or the Fujifilm X100S. Your thoughts, if any? Question. Thanks. I have a few smaller options. I've had a Canon G7 for ages. I love it because it gives me lots of flexibility, good images, and I have a waterproof case with it. Well, I did. It doesn't work anymore. I recently got my hands on a Canon ELPH. It's awesome because it's tiny and, it doesn't have the flexibility to change settings like the G7 does, but I still love it. Last, I have two Nikon V1s, Nikon 1 V1s, and I love them, and I have a slew of Nikon 1 lenses to go with them. They have tons of flexibility and the ability to control settings fairly easily. I almost always have a V1 or the little ELPH in my bag. Next question is from James. James says, what do you like about photography? What don't I like about photography? I love seeing something that maybe others don't notice and then capturing it in a photo. I love making someone happy by capturing memories for them. And, I love technology, and that's all involved. Jonathan's question is, you just put up some film photos, so time for some film questions. What film do you shoot with? What film format? What film cameras do you have? I currently have a Nikon N65 and a Nikon FG. I have a bunch of Tri-X and a few rolls of C41. I like these two cameras because they're both Nikon's most compact SLRs of their day anyway, but a couple of decades apart. Tracy says, have you ever been a fan of street photography or nighttime photography? Yes and yes. I particularly like nighttime street photography. I'm certainly not out there every night on the streets taking pictures, but when the opportunity presents itself, I do like capturing the evening happenings. Paul says, hi SnapChick, I'm just curious about my 18 to 55 millimeter kit lens. Does this kit lens really produce tack sharp photos? It depends on what you mean by tack sharp. Can the 18 to 55 kit lens produce great photos? Yes. If you pixel peep, will you be able to drill into details as much as you could with a more expensive lens? No. But I've done a few videos on kit lenses. One thing that I've learned about the current crop of kit lenses, they're actually surprisingly sharp, but they won't get you the wide apertures of expensive f2.8 zooms. I'm a big believer that it isn't the lens or the body that's going to limit you. It's your own know-how and creativity that make a far greater difference in your photography. There are certain limitations that you have with the kit lens, but if you get creative and get to know your lens, you can really get great results. Let me put it another way. A tack sharp photo that isn't interesting to you is, well, an uninteresting photo. A kit lens photo that maybe isn't super sharp, but brings you back to a different time and place, that's a great photo, regardless of the equipment used. Oh, and one more thing. If you do have a kit lens and want to get some sharper photos without spending a lot of money, prime lenses are the sharpness king, and something like a 50 millimeter f1.8 lens will cost you less than almost any other lens. Jim asks, what books would you recommend reading for someone starting out in photography? And do you have any tips for photographing fireworks this summer? Thanks. Your local library will have a slew of books to read. I would look at a few of them, both technical books and ones on the artistic aspects of photography. Maybe even look at some books on aesthetics, but really, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how the internet has lots and lots of information. My YouTube channel has lots of videos on the basics, and there are plenty of blogs and such that can give you info. The important thing to remember there, though, is that take all of that information and draw your own conclusions. A lot of people harp about the right way to shoot. Don't take their word as gospel. Everyone has a different way of doing things. Observe what people are doing, but when someone says that you should do this or must do that, that's a warning sign that they may only see things from one perspective. Gary says, hello, Leigh. I'd love for you to share your knowledge of light metering, including equipment and any tips you've learned. Thanks. Hi, Gary. Well, for those of you that don't know, metering is how your camera calculates exposure. There are different ways to calculate, though. I have an entire video on metering and the different ways your camera meters, plus a video series on exposure. Now, I think you're talking about external light meters, a device that measures the light in your scene. I currently don't have one of these. I rely on my experience and my camera's meter. Back when shooting film in the studio, an incident meter was extremely helpful to get the right exposure because you didn't have that helpful screen on the back of the camera. Now you can get your lights how you want them, fire off a couple of test shots, and use your eye and the camera's histogram to get exposure exactly how you want it. An incident meter could be helpful, but really, thanks to the cameras we have today, I consider it to be optional equipment. Esteban asks, would you recommend the Sigma 30mm? Have you made any reviews on this lens? My recommendation would depend upon your camera body, the lenses you currently own, and your goals. I would want to know if it fits into your collection to help you meet your goals, basically. If you send me that info, I'll gladly give you my opinion. In the meantime, I can say this. I used to be quite skeptical about third-party lenses, but after using a Tamron lens for a couple weeks, I kind of had a change of heart. Cleo says, I know you own the Pixma Pro 100 and have had some issues. Would you still recommend? And do you stick with Canon paper or do you use third-party paper? I do have a Canon Pixma Pro 100. I did have some issues. I was less than impressed with their initial handling of the problem, but they did make things right, and I do love the printer. I would recommend it. As for paper, I use a few different types and sizes, both Canon and Ilford paper. I've been happy with both. Anthony says, any tips on getting images out to major publications like Sports Images to Sports Illustrated or Nature to National Geographic? I do have some tips here. One is work your way up and network while you do it. These magazines are utilizing specific talent for specific jobs, especially sports. If you want to shoot football for Sports Illustrated, go out and shoot football, even if it's just high school football at the local level. Take advantage of social media to get your best images out there. Also, take advantage of sports that aren't always on national TV but always want press coverage. Contact their PR and media teams. You might not get paid, but they might love for you to come out on the sidelines and get them some shots while you're building a portfolio with legitimate pro sports. One thing that we have today that we've never had before is access to editors and other photographers who are doing this work today. Not everyone will be helpful, but if you make genuine and persistent efforts to network online and share your work, you may just make your own luck. Chad says, 1, can you touch on the pros and cons of a refurbished lens? 2, tips on beach photography, dealing with sand, salt, sun. First, the pros and cons of a refurbished lens. If you are purchasing refurbished from the manufacturer, there are relatively few cons. You're getting a lens that they will stand behind with a warranty. In the pro column, you're spending less. At the beach, the only time my camera is unprotected is when I'm shooting. When I'm not shooting, it is in a Ziploc bag or on a backpack or in a Ziploc bag in a backpack. I usually use older lenses at the beach too, as the sand and salt, they always manage to work its way into the focus and zoom mechanism. It's usually when I bring out my old 18-70 DX lens and maybe the D70 that went along with it. Keith says, Leigh, have you done a pre/post edit video? I have occasionally showed editing in some of my videos and in some of my VIP videos. Zach asks, what was your job before you were a full-time photographer? I worked in several fields during and after college. Most recently, though, it was finance. I talked about my transition to full-time photographer and photo blogger in my book, Memberture. It's available on my site as a PDF, and it's on Amazon as a Kindle ebook, too. Members of my site get it for free. Kevin asks, have you used the Sony A7 camera at all? And if so, what are your thoughts on this mirrorless full-frame camera? I've not used it, but it seems great. If things work out, you'll see one in my test lab very soon. Joe says, explain reciprocity. Okay. giving something to someone in return for something else. In photography, it means that there are two key ingredients to a consistent exposure: aperture and shutter speed. As shutter speed gets faster, aperture needs to get wider as long as the light is the same. A slower shutter speed brings in more light over time, so then the aperture must get narrow to prevent overexposure. There's a direct relationship between the two. This often is called f-stops or just stops. Taking away one stop of shutter speed means that you'd need to add one stop of aperture to keep exposure the same. In today's cameras, now that we can change ISO from shot to shot, you have 3 items to play with to control exposure. So if you increase ISO sensitivity by 1 stop, you'd need to take a stop away with either a faster shutter speed or a more narrow aperture. Michael says, how much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Seriously though, how do you know if an older lens will work? Autofocus on a newer Nikon body. Lots of used stuff out there. There are several things that would factor in. For Nikon, you can use DX lenses on FX bodies in crop sensor mode, and you can use FX lenses on DX bodies with no problem. This is not true with Canon bodies though. You can't use their lenses that are optimized for crop sensor bodies on full frame bodies. Now the bigger issue is whether or not the lens and body have an internal focus motor. One of the two needs to have one to use autofocus. Talking about Nikon, if your older lens does not have an internal focus motor, like my 24mm f2.8 or my older 50mm f1.8D lens, it can be used on a camera body that lacks an internal focus motor, like the entry-level D3300 or a D5300, but you will have to manually focus. If you have a D7000 or any of the bodies like the D300, 600, 800, or the single-digit D series, you're covered for either type of lens. You're right, there's a lot of used stuff out there, and some of those old lenses might have noisy focus or may not autofocus at all, but they can still do a great job today. Mark says, SnapChick, as someone who successfully incorporates video with audio and still pictures into your SnapChick business, I was wondering what your thoughts are about hybrid photography. I am in the process of adding short video with audio clips into my senior and family sessions, allowing me to add those moving clips to Animoto slideshows and into the digital photo apps I create, sticky albums. Hopefully setting me apart from the masses and adding services that most can share easily and enjoy on a smartphone or a tablet. Just a thought, maybe adding reviews and advice on audio and video gear to make this all happen. My thoughts on adding video clips into your sessions sounds great. Anything that you can do to set yourself apart from other photographers in your area is a good thing. Own it, show it off, and let people know that if they want those cool clips, they have to go straight to you. Tupac says, would you rock a mullet? I've had a lot of hairstyles. A mullet has never been and would probably never be one of them. Of course, I've also said that I would never wear leggings again, and I definitely have some now. Tim asks, based on your experience, what percentage of new photographers actually make it in the biz and why? Thanks, and I appreciate all you do for us up-and-comers. I don't know a percentage, but in my experience, many people start to try to be a photographer, but few really follow through. I think people don't realize the work that goes into hustling around with your camera, working with clients, finding clients. It's hard work. It can be rewarding and a fun way to make a living, but it can require a level of persistence that not everyone is ready for. A successful photography business can be far more about marketing, networking, and sales than actual time spent behind the camera. Steven asks, why buy a still camera that does video instead of a dedicated camcorder if you are going to do video? One reason is DSLR video and all the advantages that come with it. With few exceptions, DSLRs have larger sensors than consumer camcorders. This means, with just a few $100s for an entry-level DSLR, you have a sensor and lens selections that just a few years ago would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars in the dedicated video camera arena. All of those lenses that you may be assembling as part of a DSLR system, they all become useful video lenses, allowing you the same creative depth of field effects for your videos as you have with your still photos. Now, if you're planning to autofocus in your videos, this is where DSLRs struggle. They will hunt for focus, and depending on your configuration, that focus will be noisy as well. For me, mirrorless cameras are the sweet spot for still camera video. The Nikon One system does great video and focuses silently when I'm tracking little critters around. DSLR video is great and crisp for my in-studio videos where I'm setting focus for each segment and leaving it there. None of this is a knock on camcorders. If there's one that you like and you'll be doing a lot of video, go for it. But first, look at your needs and see if the advantages of video with an interchangeable lens camera outweigh the disadvantages. That's it, friends. Thanks for your great questions. I'll be doing another one of these big Q&As again sometime soon, but feel free to ask me your questions anytime. I'll be around on Facebook, on Twitter, in my email inbox.